All right, everybody. We are here with the vice presidential. See, Ryan and myself struggle with this. Libertarian Party vice presidential candidate. Is it nominee candidate? Is it? Does it matter? I don't know the
I don't
specifics.
think it matters. I would go with either nominee or candidate. I have struggled myself. I've decided that it doesn't matter, that they are interchangeable. Just don't go with vice president.
Well, see, now I feel bad because I gave Ryan a bunch of shit for saying nominee. Listen, we want to jump right in respect to your time because I don't know what kind of time you got here. To be honest,
I need to cut it off. I need to cut it off by September.
Okay. Well,
I can talk for a while, so
I was going to say, better be careful. Ryan could probably go to September. While we got you here, obviously we want to get into the issues, but before we get anywhere, I mean, let's explain even who you are. What's your background, and how did you get to the point where you ended up as a Libertarian Party vice presidential candidate?
Oh boy, is this a 2-week or a 2-minute answer?
You can give me somewhere in between.
Well, let me see if I can give you the condensed version, because I personally am probably the least interesting topic on your program. I grew up as a Republican. I was in finance and commercial finance after getting out of business school and engineering school. I worked for the White House for a couple of years after having gone back to graduate school in economics. And I was in the George Herbert Walker Bush administration. I was a civil servant and later worked for his reelection campaign. That was the election that quickly followed him having gone back on his pledge of, when they asked for more money, I'll say, read my lips, no new taxes. He went back on that pledge. And so that was a big turning point for me as a young, fiscally conservative economist. You might imagine that was a big deal in my brain. And that was sort of the beginning of the end for me as a Republican. I later came to the Libertarian Party many years later. Around the time I became a police officer, I went into the police academy after probably 25 years as a professional economist. I was 49 in the police academy, public service being something that I'd long believed in. I was a member of the Libertarian Party starting around 2010 or 11, around the time I became a police officer. I was on the road in Broward County for about 11 and a half years, working for one of the communities down there, and had a very good experience. I ran for Congress as a Libertarian in 2021, I guess it was, in a special election right after COVID. So I was running on a lot of, anti-vaccine mandate, anti-mask mandate types of issues, anti-school closure, all that good stuff. And then launched the presidential campaign soon after that, and campaigned for about 2 years for that. And coming out of our Libertarian Party convention in May, just this past May, a few weeks ago, I was nominated for vice president.
Now, that must have been a hell of an experience, because when the news came out that that Vivek Ramaswamy was going to be there and Trump showed up, and I think RFK Jr. showed up. I mean, did that were you surprised? Did anyone say, hey, by the way, Trump's showing up? Or were you like, what? We're libertarians. What do you mean Trump is showing up? Because I know there was a
no, I was surprised. I think that there are a lot of things that speak both for and against the decision to invite him. And so I have to admit, I was skeptical, and I would say even, against the idea on balance, because I was so fearful that he would, Trump in particular, succeed in spinning the narrative that he is in some sense a libertarian, or that the party was into him, or, he would get some soundbite after his talk. He would say something that the party liked, and he would use that soundbite of people applauding him and claim that the party was behind. You can imagine all the weird stuff. And so I was afraid of that. And I don't think that came to fruition as badly as I had anticipated. And so on balance, was it a good thing? Maybe. We did get a little bit more press attention than we would have. I don't have a metric on that. I don't know how much press attention we would have gotten without it.
It's unknowable.
But I do think we got some extra, so that's good. I view it more as entertainment than actually something politically important.
I mean, if I'm honest, Ryan and myself here, we've always, I don't want to speak for Ryan, but like Ryan, you can agree, like we kind of always described ourselves as Trump defenders, not necessarily supporters, because I do feel there was some totally uncalled for attacks on him. And hey, that's politics, right? But I mean, when it gets to the extent of, potentially jailing him, obviously there's coming up, there's going to be the sentencing, coincidentally a week before the Republican convention.
Yep.
That's the kind of thing that leads me into the Trump defender category. Now, there were plenty of things I had against Trump. It certainly didn't cut the national debt in half like he said he was going to. Even before COVID hit, he was spending like crazy. There was the bump stock ban, which rightfully was overturned recently. There was his devout support of Fauci and continuing to this day, Project Warp Speed. So there's so many things that I can say that I'm not a fan of. But at the end of the day, to put this man in jail, to impeach him twice, I think, that's right where I line up. Trump defender. Where do you make of the sentencing that could be coming here? Any predictions?
Well, first of all, I would like to suggest everything you just said, I agree with so much. I barely have anything to add to that. I'm not a Trump supporter either, and I never have been. Since the 1980s, when I was also in New York, I've had a lot of reasons to view this guy as a bit of a freak show. But I think that a lot of us, I think a lot of us do appreciate his anti-establishment instincts. And I agree with you with the Trump defender thing. You don't have to be a supporter to recognize that these, what even the press are referring to as lawfare attacks, right, are politically motivated. I think that most Americans would agree with that, no matter how you feel about Trump personally. Regarding the sentencing, I sure hope he doesn't get jail time. And it's not just because it would be, in my view, a miscarriage of justice, which I'm convinced that it would be. But also, I think that it would be such a miscarriage that it would make us look dopey to the rest of the world. I think it would make us look dopey to each other, which matters. I think that a lot of people would start to lose faith in a system that would be, at that point, palpably motivated by politics. And we would start to fear that it's even being executed with a political hand. It's one thing for an elected attorney, right? An elected state attorney or district attorney or federal attorney. It's one thing for an elected partisan official to go after Trump. It's easy for us to point at that and say, well, that's stupid. That's not the way it should work. But at least we get it, right? At least you understand where that crap comes from. I think it's another thing to have an appointed judge passing out a sentence which doubles down on the idea that this guy is somehow dangerous to humanity, right? And I think that would be a bridge too far for a lot of people to swallow without there being potentially some important pushback. And I don't want to characterize what that necessarily looks like. We can all use our imagination. But I fear that is the greater threat to democracy. I'm not a big fan of this. This is a threat to democracy. That's a you're a threat to democracy. You're a bigger threat to democracy, right? I think a lot.
You're a threat to democracy. To Oprah. Well, you probably are. Definitely, probably are.
Yeah. Well, at least the three of us, maybe, right? But most everybody else, I really don't see as all that threatening. And I do worry that the politicization of our criminal justice system could really be a threat to democracy.
Yeah.
We're like watching the corruption of rule of law, basically, is what we're watching. Like a kangaroo court and everything else is the way it was phrased, at least in some right-leaning circles, about the whole Trump and literally the corruption of. Dave and I always talk about the amendments. I got into a little rant the other day about why your Fourth Amendment's important and stuff, and like just the idea that you got to basically tell people why we have these things, and then you're watching them gut them at the same time. It's like this, like what Trump's going through is literally why you have a jury of your peers, why you have the right for like even having trials and everything else, and to watch the corruption of rule of law. I think you touched on it, especially being a police officer. Like, how, if I'm watching this, as I'm just using my imagination, but if I'm watching this at the presidential level, I'm watching the president going to jail potentially for whatever crime that they can cook up, apparently out of 70 charges. What are they going to do to me if they pull me over? And then I don't want to get nefarious, but plug Facebook into it with community guidelines violations and some of the other things that we have seen. And we could, surveillance states and some of the Patriot Act stuff, some of the Edward Snowden stuff. And
we had a video pulled from YouTube because we interfered in New Zealand's elections. That was their classification. We didn't even mention New Zealand in the episode.
New Zealand and Australia, as you know, famously, and other English-speaking nations like the United Kingdom and Canada do not have anything even resembling the First Amendment and don't act like they do. To your point, Ryan, that in the absence of a Bill of Rights, it's even worse. What you and I fear is that in spite of the Bill of Rights, we're on the same railroad track. We're just behind them chronologically, but we fear that that's the direction in which we're going, that the Constitution itself is no firewall. It's a brake on the speed with which we head in a direction that undermines our civil liberties, but it's not a firewall. So yeah, I'm sorry about your New Zealand experience, but wear that as a badge of honor.
I mean, the woman who won the election was fairly attractive, so I don't mind if we helped her.
A little misogyny helped her, just pat it on. Yeah, the Constitution things is gnarly too.
Because, she didn't get the female vote.
She got it. She got the male vote.
Come on, stop it.
Just the males. Girls don't.
No, I mean, look, if she got votes from women and votes from men, at some point you just got to say she's good at this. Right? It's not really identity politics if you're drawing from everybody for different reasons.
Yeah, I'd go a button lower if I could too, but I can't. Yeah, the Constitution. I just want to say it once again. I say it every time on the program when we talk about Constitution. The Constitution limits the power of the government. It doesn't give you rights, and we're seeing why. It's just so crazy. And to hear from a law enforcement and somebody like yourself at such high caliber, just completely agree with Dave and I that our blue collar, layman's terms understanding of our country and the way it operates is correct. Because my biggest thing is I've always been about, you need to talk history, religion, and politics with your friends, families, your coworkers. I've almost lost jobs because talking politics when I shouldn't. And the biggest thing I was always told, wake people up, keep up the good fight, stuff like that. It's like so yeah, it's just worth referencing every single time when we see cases. That it's just I can't not mention it.
And I'm sorry, I'm not a big advocate of losing friends over it. But in fact, I just hung up with a dear friend with whom I was having an argument about the importance of telling the truth. Because there are situations in which, as you might imagine, there are situations in which sometimes it's not worth it, right? If your friend is not listening to you, is it better to pound them with the truth and lose the friendship, which is going to undermine your ability to pull them along in the long run, right? Or is it better to, bite your tongue? Obviously, you're not going to say anything that's untrue. No one would advocate for that. But are there cases in which you're better off biting your tongue and prolonging the discussion in order to get where you want to go in the long run? Yeah, that's probably the case, right? It's tricky. We have to, in my view, in the liberty movement, get better at inviting people to come along in our direction as opposed to, hammering them along. And that's sometimes a very tricky thing to do.
And what do you find in your, especially being, you're in a position of actual, not power, but you're in a position of representation in the Libertarian Party. Like, what do you find is is there a central issue that draws more people over than others? Is it lower taxes? Is it cleaner food? Do you find yourself that there's these one or two issues that always seem to float to the top, that it's because like easy thing that got me politically active was firearms. That was the thing that introduced me into like why. So like a lot of my things early on was around the firearm. It was like that one, the one track mind kind of thing. So do you find that the transition people that come to libertarian, is it for certain?
I understand your question. The question is spot on, and I would go so far as to say it's the question. And I think, unfortunately, at least from my observation to date, the answer is no, that there isn't one particular thing, except there's one particular thing to each person. Most people have a particular issue on which they'll vote. Polling suggests that single issue voters are few and far between. I don't buy it. I think that the truth is that people have maybe they have a hard time representing it or articulating or finding the right tick box on some poll. But I think most people have something. For a lot of business people, it's going to be, the government spending too much and taxing us too much. For a lot of people who are trying to, run family finance, it's going to be things like inflation. It's going to be things like economic growth and the creation of jobs. It's going to be, for a lot of people, especially young people, it's going to be foreign affairs, foreign policy. And I would add that foreign policy feels different now than in the past. That in the past, I would have constantly made the case that we need to pursue foreign policy that's more effective, that wasted less money, that killed fewer people. And I think at this point, most people understand that our foreign policy doesn't work very well.
Not for us, it doesn't.
Not for us, it doesn't. That's well said. It doesn't work very well.
Works for BlackRock.
But they need...
Yeah, Lockheed Martin loves it, baby. Keep it up.
Yeah. And it's keeping Boeing in the air, right?
And in space.
Yeah.
They're still in space.
Yeah, they ain't coming out of the air. That's the problem.
That's another thing that we should talk about. But
we've talked about Boeing for the last few months. I would love to.
I think a lot of Democrats and Republicans can't quite let go of the foreign policy that their party keeps feeding them until they hear the following. Our policy does not align with your values. It does not align with our values as Americans. And the reason you know that that is true is because the people making these decisions make decisions that you wouldn't make. The people running our foreign policy, whether it's on the military side or, frankly, mostly on the State Department side, these are people who make decisions based on values that are antithetical to yours. If you would not, right? And I don't mean just you two guys, but nobody who can hear our voice, nobody would invade Afghanistan or Iraq, stay there for 20 years, and tolerate the destruction over 1 million lives. That is not something that Americans would do. And that's why I say, at this point, I think it's safe to say, and it's almost like bursting the balloon. When people hear this, it's like, oh, you're right. I think it's safe to say that our foreign policy is run by people who just don't see the world the way you do. It's, in other words, I think we're post-efficiency. We're beyond the argument that it works, that it's an argument that makes the world safer. Nobody.
I just seen a video of Ukrainian soldiers or Russian soldiers getting blown up by little helicopter drones. It's talk about efficiency. Like you can just send a little suicide drone to just blow somebody up halfway
it's
a world away.
Insanity. It's absolutely insanity. And so I don't think anyone is going to make the argument that there are examples out there of American military intervention, U.S. government military intervention that Americans think are a good idea. You know, if you take a dozen Americans, you lock them in a room and you gave them a half an hour, list on a piece of paper all of the military interventions that you think were worth it. You know, maybe it cost us billions of dollars, maybe it cost us thousands of lives, but it turned out to be a good idea. You know, that was worth it. That's going to be a blank piece of paper. And so I think that at this point, the emperor's got no clothes on. It really has to be said that it's just not true that if you're a good person, you can see the clothing. The truth is that you can be a good person and say out loud, no, our foreign policy sucks. It doesn't align with my values. It's made by people with some weird set of ulterior motives because it doesn't work. And the United States is not full of people that want to go around killing people. It's just not who we are. It's not who we are in terms of wanting to control other people's lives, other people's governments. It doesn't reflect who we are. And I think that people want to hear this. So I do believe that this issue will become more important.
Well, I got to say, this swings in favor of the Libertarian Party for sure, because there's no doubt Republicans have historically been the war hawks and Democrats lately have definitely been the war hawks. And, you know, a lot of people say Trump, you know, no new wars or whatever, but then there's the argument to be made that the Abraham Accords had led to what's going on in Israel, Palestine, Gaza, whatever you want to call it. You know, as someone who has a sister who currently lives in Israel with my nieces, you'd be surprised to find out that it turns out I don't agree that Israelis should be annihilating Palestinians left and right. There's one thing to have self-defense, but then there's another thing to be outright on the attack. Somebody who's recently been making the rounds, and he's always been great on foreign policy, but he's making the rounds on this Israel-Palestine conflict now is Dave Smith, comic Dave Smith, obviously famous you know, libertarian. I don't think anybody does it better than him as far as the debate goes. What does the libertarian view look like? You guys get into office, you inherit Russia, Ukraine, and you inherit Israel, Gaza. Like, what happens from there? What's your move next?
I think you've got to commit to ending foreign aid right out of the box. You've got to be able to shut that down. It's one of the things you can do.
Is that just an incentive? Do you consider that an incentive to get the countries to like just acquiesce better to the deal or the peace deal or some kind of?
Well, sometimes, but I think that all too often, I think there's a couple problems with it. One is it doesn't work, that you don't actually buy a lot of influence. I think the Middle East is one of those places that demonstrates that, you know, we have given billions of dollars to the Israeli government. We have absolutely no influence over them today. Billions of dollars per year to the Israeli government. We have no influence over them. We have given billions of dollars per year collectively to all the other players in the Middle East, right? If you were to add them up, Hezbollah, Hamas, strangely, the national government of Lebanon, of Egypt, the Kingdom of Jordan. We've given all these people billions of dollars per year when you add them all up, and billions of dollars per year just to the Israeli government alone. We have no influence over them whatsoever, right? We cannot influence the Egyptian government to take refugees. We cannot influence the Israeli government to shut down, even to abate, even to slow the prosecution of the hot part of the war, chasing down Hamas, right? So it's apparent, however you feel about it, if you were completely, you know, pro IDF, if you thought what was going on in Gaza was the greatest thing since sliced bread, you would nonetheless have to admit that the American government has acquired for itself absolutely nothing in return for foreign aid in that area. And so the reason I pointed out is not because it's the only example, but because it's the most stark and most recent example of the fact that we just don't get anything for it. But in exchange, what we do get is nothing that we want. We gain responsibility without having any influence for the decisions made by all of the players. No matter what they do, no matter how stupid, it's going to, it's going to redound to us. People are angry with the U.S. government, and by extension, to a certain extent, the American people, for whatever it is that the IDF does. That's a weird thing. Let that sink in. That's a very weird proposition. And then to your point regarding the Abraham Accords, I applauded the Trump administration when they pulled that off. But, and I think this is where you're going, did it make the Israeli government feel, I don't have a good answer to this, right? I'm not a mind reader. But
this is just kind of one of the theories, though.
Yeah. Well, let's pursue that, because it's not impossible, right? Did it empower the Israeli government to believe that it had a completely free hand in Gaza, right? That's completely plausible. So that when the attack in October happened, and I'm not suggesting that there was, there's a lot of conspiracy theories behind that I'm not buying into, that could turn out to be true. I mean, all kinds of, I didn't think that the U.S. government had a hand in blowing up the pipeline in the Baltic Sea either, but that turns out to be true.
Oh, you're talking about the Keystone?
Yeah. Well, not Keystone. That's close.
Yeah.
No, Biden blew up Keystone on his own. Keystone is the one he admitted to blowing up.
Yeah, we certainly called that immediately, just for the record on the show.
All right, good for you.
Oh man, we laughed about it actually, because we're just like, they think we're stupid, man.
But my point is that you can't count any of these things out, because the information complex inside the American government is very strange, and there's just no way to know whether they were behind something or not. But anyway, the point is, you don't have to believe in some weird conspiracy behind the October attack. All you have to know is that the world is random and weird stuff happens. And that when you empower a government to believe that it has a free hand to do whatever it wants, and the United States government is going to back you come hell or high water, that's a fairly dangerous proposition, and not one that I believe that we should be inviting in the Middle East or anywhere else.
Well, that's a good point. To make a misogynist reference to this, if you don't mind. It's kind of like the drunk girl at the bar, and she knows she has her boyfriend with her, so she can run her mouth. That's kind of what all these foreign countries are. They know they can do whatever they want, because we're going to.
I wish I had no idea what you were talking about.
David, are you calling Israelis a drunk girl at a bar right now? Is that what you?
I'm just saying. One of the people in our chat right now wanted to clarify. When you say you're going to end foreign aid, is it military aid only, and would we still be sending humanitarian aid? Or is it all aid in general, just out the door?
Well, all military aid, absolutely out the door. That's got to be shut down by the first Wednesday, right? Humanitarian aid is a slightly different animal. The problem with humanitarian aid is that there's so much mission creep that, one man's humanitarian aid is another man's, nation building. We end up.
That's how we're in Iraq for 20 years, right?
Well, that's a good point. You can start out saying, well, we have to, on a humanitarian basis, help these people with food. I get that. I mean, you just blew up their economy. On some level, you've got a responsibility to make sure that they can eat.
And then that turns
out to be, well, we have to maintain their whole economy for some period of time. That's the problem. So you need a firewall against mission creep. The other thing that needs to be said is that poverty, including famine, typically, is a political phenomenon. It is not, typically. There are exceptions. I mean, I get that there are massive droughts and tsunamis and things. I'm not trying to suggest that there are not. But the vast majority of things for which people want to give humanitarian aid are political phenomena. And so I think you need to be careful about chicken and egging this, if I can turn chicken and egg into a verb. I think that you need to be careful about treating the symptoms when the underlying problem is that you've got a government that is just a complete mess, and just pouring aid into a country that's having a distribution problem doesn't help, because the distribution is all messed up. And fundamentally, if you've got a system that's completely corrupted, unless you're going to take on, the entire economy of that nation, you're not going to make a dent. It is absolutely the mirror image of the fact that sanctions don't work, right? We're always imposing sanctions on China and Russia and anyone else who pisses us off, one Friday afternoon. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work because the governments don't care. And if the underlying problem is the government, typically the government at hand is one that doesn't care about its people, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't have political backing for it inside the United States. The United States public is led to believe that it's a good idea to bring sanctions against these countries because these countries are not democracies. Well, if that's true, that, they don't have a democratically elected government, what makes you think that this government is all of a sudden going to say, well, we care so much about our people that these sanctions are really awful, we better change policy? That just doesn't happen. And so you find that sanctions and foreign aid are both ineffective ideas.
Are you telling me that the democratically elected president for life, Xi Jinping, doesn't care about our sanctions?
You son of a bitch, Dave. You son of a bitch, Dave. You took it right out of me.
We've done the show
that
too
guy
long
was
together,
democratically elected. He's democratically elected, president for life.
Let's just say that
inevitable.
might be the case. Yeah, that might be the case.
Putin won recently. What was it, 99% to 1 or something?
Yeah, the guy that voted against him got thrown out, so I think he's backed up to 100.
Yeah, he only had to level an apartment building to kill all of his political opposition in one fell swoop. Oh, man.
Real quick, let's
President
get
for
into.
life.
I know this has been something that's plagued not just the Libertarian Party, but literally every other party since inception here. Thursday, there's going to be the first presidential debate. RFK Jr. did not qualify, even though he presented CNN a poll, their own poll. They're hosting the debate. He presented their poll where he polled over 15%, and they said, no. Libertarians are not going to be qualifying. Green Party's not going to be there. Independent Party's not going to be there. I understand you can't have every Tom, Dick, and Harry who says he's a political party running. I can't just say, hey, we're the December 1773 party and Ryan's running and get him on stage. I get that. But these are legitimate parties. I mean, with all due respect, Libertarian Party, Independents, and even the Green Party to some extent. Like, what does it take to get somebody on the stage that's not a Democrat or a Republican?
It is an uphill climb, and there is some chicken and egg to this as well. And Ryan, I'm sorry, buddy, that Dave just threw you under the bus there as an example of someone who should not be on the debate stage. I would vote for you, okay? Just because Dave doesn't love you doesn't mean that I don't.
You've only known him for 30 minutes, I promise you.
Okay,
he's here to make me feel small and nothing less.
Before we're done. We got 29 minutes for me to develop the disdain for Ryan that you have, Dave.
I built that studio. Don't let him fool you. I built that studio.
There is a chicken and egg, right? We recognize that we need to be included in the system, in the protocol, in the logistics, in the mechanics of mainstream press in order to get the attention that would warrant forcing them to include us. I get all of that. And it's really something that, this is a classic example where they set two criteria. One is that you had to be on ballots that would qualify you for 270 electoral votes.
Which he is, and to be clear, by he, RFK Jr., and you guys are as well, right? Do you have all 50 states again?
We're expecting to be on approximately 48. We have an outside shot at making 49. That is not been concluded yet. Yeah, we're having trouble in New York. All right.
Oh, that's weird.
Oh, go.
Yeah, that's weird. Who would have thought?
The Empire State, indeed. It says right on the list.
Well, ironically, we have Larry Sharpe to thank because he did so well running for governor those years ago that it scared the poop
They were not
out of
happy
the
with that guy.
Democrats. And they moved legislation to make it harder to get on the ballot. That's actually
he ran
what
an
happened.
excellent,
That's a real shame.
campaign. I do like Larry Sharpe. He ran an excellent campaign for New York.
Of course he did. We all love Larry, and it was his success that caused them to raise the bar. So that's a weird thing. But to your point, both Kennedy and the Libertarians, pardon me, I'm sporting a bit of a cold,
COVID
qualified ballot-wise, but even though Kennedy made CNN's own poll, they're able to exclude him. I would also argue that there's another irony here, and that is that it would also be in CNN's interest to include Bobby Kennedy and to include Chase Oliver, my running mate, because it would make better television. It would be more interesting. I think there's a whole lot of people who aren't going to watch because I don't know what the numbers. I mean, maybe they'll get a good viewership. I don't know. But there's a whole lot of people that aren't going to watch because they already know, they've seen the show before. Not only have they watched All You Can Handle of Joe himself and All You Can Handle of Donald himself, they've seen these two debate before. So it's not like there's going to be anything, it's not like you don't know how it ends, right? But I guarantee
like watching
if you
Rocky
put
again.
Chase Oliver in there and Bobby Kennedy, to be like, first of all, who the hell are these guys?
Mm-hmm.
And the clips would be something, because there really would be different things said. It's not merely the fact that I believe a lot of people would be won to libertarianism, which I do believe is true, by the way. But I also think it would be just more fun, more interesting. I think a lot of people would enjoy it. So personally, I think that CNN is shooting themselves in the foot. And they're not the ones pulling the trigger. I get the Republican and the Democrat, only agreed to this because there was some standard that they figured Kennedy wouldn't be able to clear.
Yeah, and
well, it's just
by the way,
interesting.
we mentioned New York. That New York is also looking to remove RFK Jr. from the ballot as well. So don't feel left out.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point. We would like to get Chase and RFK into a debate. I would like to sit down and have a conversation with Nicole Shanahan, and that doesn't have to be a debate. I would just like to. I've met each of them. I have some respect for each of them, Nicole Shanahan and Kennedy. They seem like, decent, obviously smart, patriotic, earnest, sincere people. We have some policy differences. I'm not going to minimize that. I think that they're significant. But at no point do I get the impression that those differences are so large that they're people I couldn't work with, couldn't have a conversation with, couldn't have a debate with, couldn't have an administration with. They seem like wholly rational people. The differences seem a hell of a lot smaller than, when you look at the Biden administration or Donald Trump. There are some differences that are just weird. I see Biden and Trump backing ideas that I just can't get my brain around sometimes.
Like shutting down the whole country for a virus that was made in a Chinese lab. I agree with you.
How about financing the Chinese lab in the first place and then lying
there
about
was
it?
No NIH funding, Dr. Paul. If I could just speak to one guy down in D.C., it'd be Fauci, just for the afternoon. I'd love to talk to that guy. God almighty.
Peacefully, of course.
Peacefully. Super peacefully. I just wanted to say something quick about the debates. It's just interesting because, like, Mike, you said that it would basically be a win-win for everybody. It'd be a win for the country, a win for CNN, a win for the parties. And you're like, yeah, why wouldn't you do this? Obviously, we know it's American dream because you got to be asleep to believe it, George Carlin thing. But
it's a big club you ain't in, George Carlin.
Yeah. And it's just reminiscent because when you go to like music festivals or like when you go to different comedy shows and stuff, that's how you get introduced to new ideas and new like mediums. Or you go to a museum, see a new painting that you've never seen before, you meet a new art, like so like why would politics be any different? And obviously I understand, that
I know and good for
they
you for
contrive
being so young and getting the George Carlin reference. I'm really impressed by that, because that's before your time. And feel free to use as many dirty words as you feel like you need to, even if I can't join in until after November.
The 7 dirty words.
We would never.
I know you would never. My campaign manager tells me I can't use any of them until November 6th. So that's just the way that goes. I know that in this case, it's the parties that control the whole process. And I think in large part, that's because the parties now control the media. And that was not completely the case certainly until 40 years ago, right? Before we had the complete bifurcation of media, of electronic media based on the internet, right? We used to have a bifurcation in print media 100 years ago. But then with the advent of television, it was mostly merged. It was, left leaning, but it wasn't the way that it is now, where
so narrative
CNN is basically a mouthpiece for the Democratic Party and Fox News for the Republican Party, and everyone else follows suit one way or another. That's a relatively recent phenomena, but that's what's driving this whole thing.
Well, I got to tell you, one of the great things was when old school media died, and I'm going to be honest, it's dead. I mean, most of CNN's viewers are empty airport seats, and everyone went to these platforms like YouTube and Rumble, and for a while that was fine. But then these people aren't stupid, right? Democratic Party, Republican Party, they caught up, they understand. We've talked about, since the Twitter files, we read all of them honestly on the air. But these open portals, the FBI, the DHS, all these alphabet organizations,
World Health Organization,
communication lines with YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, which is now X. They probably still have it because I know Linda Yaccarino said they do. With basically only Rumble still fighting world governments, which God bless them. What do you do about control with big tech? And then at what point? I know the Bill of Rights. We love the Bill of Rights, and it's to limit the government's strain on your freedoms, right?
Yep.
What do you do when it's a private company, even though it's very clearly the FBI telling Mark Zuckerberg, hey, look out for the Hunter Biden laptops?
Yeah. You've got to get the government out of it. And one of the things that you've got to do in order to achieve that is to free these social media companies from their obligation to censor.
How do we do that exactly? Like what is the obligation of them?
Yeah.
Sorry.
You take away their ability to censor. And the way you do that is to take away the protection against civil liability.
Section 230, the libel
exactly
clause.
The problem with Section 230 is that it says that you can't be sued for censorship as long as that censorship is to take care of pornography, smut, and blah blah blah, and other objectionable things. And so it creates this huge loophole.
So Ryan and myself,
civil asset forfeiture of the freaking internet right there.
Like many things that go wrong in our economy that invite the government in, the protection against civil liability has created this problem in social media. Just like the protection against civil liability for the big pharmaceutical companies when they create vaccines has allowed them to do all kinds of crazy stuff that the government wants them to do, right? like rolling out a vaccine in an hour and a half because the administration wants you to do that. Don't worry about the side effects. We're going to give you a head. Yeah, we're going to give you a head start because, oh, look, it turns out that we know something about this virus. Okay, but the protection against civil liability has unleashed, admittedly unwittingly. When this started, like a lot of other dopey regulatory frameworks that our federal government comes up with, these people had no idea that what they were doing was so stupid because they're not libertarian. They don't understand that when you mess with the market, something's going to go wrong, right? So in 96, the rewrite was intended to allow these social media companies to take down smut. Smut was the big word in 96, right? Would allow them to take down smut, which would have, were it not for the legislation, tripped them into being called publishers. Because if you censor, you're a publisher in the eyes of the law.
But then you lose the protection of being sued because
bingo. So they invited them, in effect, to become publishers with protection for purposes of smut reduction, and then wrote it too broadly. First of all, as a libertarian, you wouldn't want them even to be able to take down smut, but never mind that, right? It doesn't bother me that they can take down smut. Porn would find another portal. That's not the big problem. As a matter of civil liberty, we want to protect porn. But the big problem here is that they wrote it too broadly and said other objectionable things. And so now the government can boss these people around because they can censor, because they've got the protection. So anyway, the whole thing needs to be taken down. And that would force the social media companies to, in effect, decide, are you going to be a platform, right? Are you going to be AT&T or Verizon? Or are you going to be a publisher? Are you going to be the New York Times? You've got to decide one or the other. And I'm pretty darn sure that they would, I say sarcastically, because of course they would decide, we just want to be platforms. We don't want to censor. The only reason we got into the censorship game is because you people in Washington told us to. And they could continue making their gazillions of dollars without the obligation to censor. Anything would happen that could happen, and the government wouldn't be able to do a damn thing about it. Just like the government doesn't censor our phone calls. Well, they censor yours, Ryan's, but they don't censor anybody else's phone calls because it's
the amount of trouble I have with technology is daunting. Okay, it's daunting.
I can imagine.
I feel like Terrence Howard on Joe Rogan.
To be fair, and I think that Dave is about to mention this, to be fair, if there's anyone that we would choose to censor, Dave, are you with me? It would be Ryan. Right?
Oh, it's Ryan. Yeah.
It's Ryan. Like if you were to list all the people we know on the planet that are probably having conversations that we need to listen in on, Ryan's going toward the top of that list, right?
I mean, he's hoping to beat Alex Jones in lawsuits. If you hit $2 billion, you got him beat.
I am not. There's no jury of my peers. It's impossible. I'm a man of God. I'm made in the image of the Creator. There's no jury of my peers. It's physically impossible. There's no court that can contain me. I'm an undefined body in a meat sack that you cannot stop my spirit. I will destroy these people that want to. What did Thomas Jefferson swear on the altar of liberty or something? He swore on the altar of. Yeah, I'm not.
That is so beautifully said that I can see now why the government wants to censor you so badly.
Yeah,
you've just made an eloquent case for their censorship.
Yeah, microplastics on my penis to lower my testosterone, so I'm not strong, so I can't even go down there. It's just they got this whole thing engineered to slow me down. Dave's slowly lifting off the top of the podcast.
Not to laugh, okay?
I'm here for comic relief mostly.
He's got a fresh hot toddy there. He almost burned his throat.
Dave gets
speaking of Ryan, speaking of Ryan just being a clump of cells, in the Libertarian Party, there is splits on certain issues. the border and abortion seem to be two big splits. I'm not a single issue voter, but certainly I'm pro-life, and I'm not apologetic about it. What is the Chase Oliver, Mike Ter Maat stance on abortion?
It's funny. Chase's position and my position have been pretty much the same, even though we come at this from two different directions. I've always been pro-life, and he's always called himself pro-choice. But we wind up in pretty much the same position, which is it ought to be up to the states, right? And that states are going to have to decide. The big thing I tell people is that public policy has to be downstream from culture. And our culture is not going to tolerate either one of the extremes. States are by and large, Indiana might be an exception. We'll see how that plays out over time. But I don't think that our culture is going to tolerate a complete ban that says, from the moment of inception, we're not going to allow women to have an abortion. And the reason I believe that is because inviting the government in to criminalize something is a big deal. And I just think that most Americans believe. However, you and I might believe, Dave, as people who are pro-life, I just don't think the American people are quite ready to ban, by and large, an abortion at inception. And I believe that inviting the government in to criminalize something is something you should only do when the culture is fully on board. I just don't think we're there yet. And similarly, I don't think that our culture is in a place that says, yeah, if you want to have an abortion 10 minutes before the baby is delivered at 9 months, that's okay. I just don't think our culture is there yet either, no matter how certain people in the pro-choice movement may feel. I recognize there are, a certain number of people who are okay with that. Our culture is not. And so each state is going to have to pick a place on that spectrum. And this is cringy. I recognize this is cringy stuff, right?
It's not
picking
a
place. You're picking a point in time on the gestational timeline before which it's okay, after which it's not okay. We all want women and doctors to be making these decisions without the government involved. And yet our culture is just not going to tolerate, like I say, last minute abortions completely on a discretionary basis. And I think where that line is going to be drawn, maybe not today and maybe not tomorrow, but soon and forever, I think that line will probably get drawn at viability. I think that a lot of people are going to coalesce around viability as an important concept in deciding at that point, the government has an obligation in representing our culture and representing what Americans believe, which is if you have a chance at survival, we as a society want you to have that chance. But like I say, I think that in the main, people, Dave, you said you're pro-life, so am I. I think that it's up to us to make that case in our society more generally to affect culture. What I don't like is using government, using public policy as a tool to win our argument. I think you got to win the argument first and then have public policy affected afterwards.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm certainly all on board with it's a very constitutional standpoint, by the way, where, listen, there's no clause that says the federal government has any stay by default. 10th Amendment, 9th Amendment, it gets defaulted to the states. That's fine. I love that. Culturally, if you want to go off of viability, can be a tricky argument. I mean, me and Ryan are 30 years old. We're barely viable as it is.
I'm definitely not viable.
But no, I agree with you. I don't mind leaving it to the states. That's exactly what the Supreme Court did. The only fight you're going to have is trying to battle the narrative from the mainstream. And again, the big tech that was, taken over by Democrats, where they're saying, we got to codify Roe, even though the Supreme Court just said no.
Right. Well, that's right. And I wonder whether the Supreme Court would tolerate federal legislation in this area. And I suspect the answer would be no. But at the same time, I know a lot of people are okay with federal legislation. I'm not okay with it. I believe that it ought to be left up to the states.
Yeah, absolutely. I know Ryan, and this might be out of the blue, but Ryan, you've been dying to ask him now for however many weeks a very specific question. I'm curious, Ryan, what was your question?
Yes, I've been waiting. I've been sleeping and dreaming of the best way to ask this question. All right. I just want to get you on
really
record.
Don't know what this is.
I want to get you on record. So when you are president and vice president, I can be the first guy to hold your feet to the fire if you don't do what you say you're going to do.
Not president, vice president. And I know that they say as vice president, you're only a heartbeat away. But let's be honest. Chase Oliver is a very, very young, very healthy guy. So
I'm sure there's a couple body doubles between they get to.
Well, hold on now. Did he get the jab? I'm just saying.
Myocarditis, David.
I'm a Bills fan. I watched a professional athlete heart stop right on the field. I'm just saying.
Dave, that was a 1 in a billion collision. Never happens in football. All right. Here it is. Do you believe that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself? And do you believe that there is more than one island quite like that? Do you believe that there's more islands or more facilities, particularly in the region, in the place, that do the very same thing that the Epstein operation was doing? And do you believe that Epstein killed himself?
In answer to the first one, maybe, and I'll explain why. In an answer to the second one, probably. In other words, these are
because mainstream media tells us there's no more islands. That's the only island. Jeffrey Epstein. It's a fluke thing. Just never go back to sleep, America. Just turn off the coffee pot.
Well, that's one reason why you should suspect there's more islands, right? The idea that would be the only one, I think it's not quite as far-fetched as the idea that we're the only civilization in the universe. But you get my point, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of islands. There's a lot of islands. There's a lot of pedophiles. And the idea that that's the only place that those two aligned strikes me as statistically unlikely.
Because you would think that you would think that, I mean, obviously we've seen the Epstein arc go full circle here, but you would, if this was, look, we see what they did with Trump with hush money and a porn star. You know what I mean? Like, it just boggles my imagination that we haven't, like, nobody's pressing government agents. There's nobody behind the scenes like, dude, there's got to be more islands. I mean, Ashton Kutcher from That 70s Show opened a business that was trying to get child traffickers through the southern border, if I'm not mistaken, and stuff. Like, if we could do this at a private level, it just doesn't make sense. We don't hear about it. We're told it doesn't exist. We've heard about the flight logs. We've heard about high-profile people and sheiks and freaking kings and queens from Persian. I mean, this is obviously outside of the jurisdiction of the United States, probably, and there's some this and that, and then all the black ops stuff, so it's hard to find. So I guess that's part of my question, is why it's so silly even to begin with, is like, we obviously know there's more of these, but why is it just so dead in the water? Like, there's no way that that's the only bill. I told Dave on the program, you don't even got to keep looking. Just look at who built the building. Like, we don't even have to interview these people. Just look at the contract. I'm a construction worker. Jeffrey Epstein doesn't know how to do electricity. Somebody had to put electricity in on the island. Somebody had to do the plumbing. Somebody had to drop off the drywall. Why can't we interview the guy that drove the drywall there on a boat? We have to interview Bill Clinton because he's on the flight log. No, we don't. We don't need to do that. If you can scrap Dave and I's YouTube channel because of something I said a year ago, we can't do that with the building materials for the very building that was housing known pedophiles and recording equipment, and the guy just miraculously kills himself. I mean,
well, look,
I'm I know it's conspiracy.
I think that these two stories are highly related in a way that is more important than they both have to do with Jeffrey Epstein. You've got a jurisdictional issue, you've got an incompetence issue, and you've got a motivational issue, right? You don't have anyone with any competence who can exert jurisdiction, and you've got all kinds of motivation to cover it up. And I'm guessing a whole lot of money being thrown around to help. I don't want to use the term cover up quite yet, but a whole lot of money being thrown around to dissuade people from looking too closely.
I tend to be in the, and I know you probably got it's not quite September yet, but I know your time is somewhat limited. So I appreciate you hanging out.
Well, that's okay. But and I know we've only got a couple of minutes, but regarding the first half, the reason I say maybe he did kill himself, right? I'm not convinced that he didn't. I'm not convinced that he was murdered. Mm-hmm. I think that's an open question. I'm not even sure. I mean, maybe I'd go 50-50, right? I don't know.
Okay.
The reason I say I don't know is I actually think that is a larger indictment of the system than saying that he killed him, that he was murdered. Because if he was murdered, at least you'd be able to say, well, somebody paid someone was highly motivated, some very powerful person, maybe somebody on the flight log, right, was motivated to make this thing happen. And you would say, sure, but that's what it would take to create this cover up. What I'm saying is it wouldn't take that to have made what happened happen. The system is so messed up. Boy, it's really hard to use the right words in this. I need George Carlin's vocabulary back. The system is so messed up that this guy who is on a suicide watch because he was suicidal, right? They knew him to be suicidal. It wasn't like someone said, well, he's stuck in a bad spot in life. He's going through a bad patch, so let's throw him. No. They knew he was suicidal, and he died. Under your nose in custody.
In Rikers Island.
Well, the cameras failed, so it's tough to figure it out.
What I'm saying is the system is worse than you think. Like,
because they don't even.
If you think that for this guy to have died in custody couldn't possibly happen, but for a trillionaire throwing $1 billion at it, I'm saying you're setting the bar too high. You don't understand how bad that system is. That system is so bad that guy could have killed himself on a suicide watch. That's how incompetent these people are.
Well, if there's any need for smaller government, that is the argument. That even
I really appreciate you. I appreciate you taking the time to come on. Do you want to make a final push before we end it here? What's the final?
I think that was where we need to end this. Look, I would like to invite people that want to get involved with the campaign. Pardon my cough drop. It keeps my head functioning. I would like to invite people to join the campaign. There are a lot of reasons to do so. I think the campaign is going to make a very important case to the American people. I think we have a real opportunity to play a disruptive role in American politics. And so if you're out there, if you can hear my voice, if you'd like to get involved as a volunteer, if you'd like to throw some money behind the right cause, you can visit either of the websites. You can go to MikeTermaat.com, which is tricky to spell because Ter Maat has 2 A's in it. You can go to VoteChaseOliver.com, which is easier to spell. You can go to goldnewdeal.org and see my platform.
I read the Gold New Deal, man. I like it.
All right. So, you got some options. If you can't spell goldnewdeal.org,
don't vote.
Yeah, you're not allowed to vote. That's all I can say.
If you can't spell the golddeal.com, you ain't black.
All right. I love it. Thank you so much for coming on. I don't know if you guys are you ain't black. I don't know if you guys are coming to Pennsylvania anytime soon. I'm in the western Pennsylvania area. If I see any stops out there, I'm certainly going to stop out.
What town are you in?
Meet you. I'm in a little town called Kane, but we're about 2.5 hours from Pittsburgh, 2 hours from Buffalo, and 3 hours from Cleveland. So if you're anywhere near any of those
2.5 hours west of Pittsburgh?
Like northwest.
I was going to say 2.5 hours of Pittsburgh. That's like that's Ohio. I mean, I don't know what to say about that.
I'm in a weird in between. Yeah. So if you guys are anywhere in those areas, I'll come out.
I was just in Pittsburgh a couple days ago.
Oh, well, you should have been on a couple days ago. I would have known.
Yeah, well, that's okay. I had to change a flat tire on 79.
Oh, good
that's
Lord.
A shame.
All right,
your electric car didn't have a run flat on it already? Like built-in run flats on the electric. Your electric car didn't have a built-in run flat to just keep you inflated while you were driving down the road? A government-issued run flat?
I don't even know on how many levels that we need to unpack that. No, let's just say...
I got billions.
Yeah, let's just say no. My Chevy Silverado does not have enough technology to keep me running when I blow a flat.
All right, awesome. We'll stop out and see everyone. Chase Oliver, Mike Ter Maat, and go to the Gold New Deal to. That's the easiest one. Go to Gold New Deal to contribute and help them campaign. Get the word out.
That's right. GoldNewDeal.org.
.org. Whole organization, unlike us, Dave Ryan, and Mr. Mike here. December 17th, 73. Catch us. Doctor. Sorry. Oh my God, so disrespectful. Maybe when I get a doctorate, David, I'll understand. Look, I'm trying to get a studio. Dave's got the studio. He's got a doctor on. I'm just a podcaster. I'll catch you guys later. As always, appreciate you guys for your time. And don't forget to go vote. And yeah, I'll see you guys later.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much.
This was fun. I really appreciate you for your time. This was super fun. And I really appreciate you entertaining the Epstein question. So